Welcome to another episode of the Victory Podcast, driven by Audi. I'm your host, Keely and Cody, joined by my co-host and former USC quarterback, Cody Kessler. Cody, we are back to break down USC's 2024 spring game. We finally got to see this Trojan team live making their Coliseum debut. I'm excited to talk about what we saw and kind of break down what we're projecting for the future.
Yeah, and it was exciting to see in person finally, and we did work Trojans Tailgate, Trojans Live, so we didn't get to fully watch it.
Show on set.
Yeah, it was funny because they were playing the game on the screen, but we were also
your instinct is to turn
on
around.
The screen. Yeah, and we wanted to turn around, but I remember last year we did this. They kept, Gio was in our ear, our producer, about Sean Cody turning around and watching the game the whole time, and everyone just staring at his back. But, yeah, I got a couple breaks. So you came in and took over for me on a segment, so I could watch a little bit. But got to watch the game again, had it recorded, so I got to rewatch it.
You took some detailed notes.
Very detailed notes. I like breaking it down. And, you know, we talked about last week, don't overreact. You know, there's some stuff on Twitter. People are going to come up with assumptions based off of this game, and it's the first time that we get to see everything live, so I'm excited to talk about it. But again, don't overreact. Don't read too much into it. Yeah, exactly. But there are some good things that happen on Saturday that we can look forward to going into the summer and into fall. Some of that is position battles, right? Individual performances is something we can talk about today. We got some good topics. I'm not going to sit here again, do an 8-hour episode and talk about every single series and every play, but some individual performances. Also talk about rotation. I think that's important, although it's not going to be set in stone who the ones and twos are, and there's still competition all over the field. You do get a little bit of an idea of where the coaches are at, what units they think work well together, how these newcomers are making an impact. That's kind of one of the topics we wanted to look at as well. But overall, again, we're going to talk about a very simple thing, and that's just a glorified practice, is what we call the spring game. Yeah. I've said before, the 14 practices are way more important. We didn't see those, but some of the things that we heard throughout the spring with the coaching staff and guys that are stepping up, we saw that on Saturday, and you want to see those consistencies and if that held true, and I think that absolutely happened. But again, we got some, I think, 5 or 6 topics we get to break down, some important stuff, but overall, don't overreact. It was great to see the defense win.
Yeah.
I thought, you know, spring games are more of an offense dominated. It's a glorified 7-on-7. You're not touching the quarterback, so offenses tend to win those games. So it was very encouraging to see the defense win, and overall to see Lynn's defense on the field for the first time publicly, so where we can talk about it, was great to see for me as well.
For sure. I'm really excited to dive into it. Before we do, just a couple reminders. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and if you want to go above and beyond, you can rate and review the show on whatever podcasting app you use. It helps grow the show, and we greatly appreciate everyone who's done it so far. Also, if you ever want to get your voice heard, be sure to look out for a tweet or a question box on either Twitter or Instagram. Our socials are VictoryPodUSC, and you can find us there. Alrighty, Cody, let's jump into it. Very excited. You kind of touched on it already, but the first topic I want to talk about is obviously D'Anton Lynn's defensive debut. I would say the most eye-catching stat from the day, obviously, is the 4 interceptions, 3 of which were on 3 consecutive series. Yeah. It was just, I thought it was so funny because you kind of mentioned it, but we were kind of pressing the brakes a little bit, like, don't be mad at this defense if this offense looks way more ahead. And here we see 4 interceptions in the game. So I was just curious your takeaway from that stat alone.
Yeah, I sigh a little bit because I'm a quarterback at heart.
Yes.
You know, I've always I don't like to see interceptions. It's frustrating. Some of those were throws that I know Miller and Maiava would like to have back. Jensen had one as well, but that's neither here nor there. We'll get into the quarterback position a little bit, but encouraging from the defensive side of the ball, right? That's something that we got away from last year was takeaways. There were plenty of them in this game, and I love that it came from the secondary. That was so awesome to see. The coverage was phenomenal all game long, and it felt like when guys did get a little bit out of position, they did a great job of getting back in their spot, making a play on the football. I love the tall, lengthy style corner we had right now. Jacoby Covington's obviously one of those guys, but then you add DeCarlos Nicholson in there. Marcellus Williams isn't as big as those guys, but he has a great range. We saw that on that interception, that cover 2 hole shot throw that Miller tried to make. That was unbelievable, and that was kind of what I said at the opening of the show, is you want to see those consistencies, right? Lincoln talked so highly about Williams this spring. That was a high-level veteran type of play. It was
True
cover
freshman.
2, baited
First
him
spring.
into the throw, and that's against Miller in the ones, right? It was baited him into the throw on cover 2, sat in the corner. That means cover 2 is he's the underneath corner. There's a safety help over the top, baited down low, forced Miller to make that throw. And I mean, I don't want to block the camera, but he's full extension, unbelievable catch, turn around, got the crowd pumped up, got the defense pumped up. But overall for me, that was very encouraging because we talked about outside of Mekhi Blackman, there's really hasn't been a solidified corner spot the last couple of years. And that's been frustrating, especially when you want to have a dominant front seven and get after the quarterback. You have to be able to cover on the back end. So I wouldn't say A+, obviously room to improve on, but definitely A-, B+ area there for the DBs as a whole. And it even felt like on that touchdown pass to Mekhi Lemon from Maava, there was great coverage there by Christian Pierce. So even when they were making catches, the receivers, there was always that sticky type coverage around them, guys in the right spot. Keely Arnold covered well at the safety position. Kamari Ramsey was all over the field. But yeah, for me, one of the most encouraging things throughout that game was how well the DBs played and the corners in particular.
Yeah, it felt like they played with a confidence we haven't really
there you
seen
go. Great
lately.
word right there, yeah.
And just to break it down, DeCarlos Nicholson had a pick off of Jaden Maava. Marcellus Williams, you just talked about that pick off of Miller Moss. Malachi Crawford off of Jake Jensen. And then Prophet Brown with a pick six. That
106-yard pick six.
That was a track meet for him.
Yeah, I was standing right there too. I think I was with you when that happened. I think we just got off the show, and because that was towards the end of the game.
Yeah.
And they run down, and they were the coolest part for me too wasn't a terrible throw by Miller. Again, it was a good throw on a slant route to Hudson, right position, and I think it was Jacoby who broke that up on that play. It was either Jacoby or DeCarlos Nicholson, one of them, but they got in there, got a hand on the football, popped it up in the air, and then Prophet Brown, understanding where to be on that play, right spot, right time, was right there to make the play. And that's what happens when guys rally to the football. That's what happens when on that Marcellus Williams pick, I understand the concept of this as I have help over the top, but I'm still going to be underneath. So if I don't make the play, my buddy can over the top as well. They work so well together, and it's just so exciting to see and so encouraging to see. And even when we were doing the show, talking to Sua on the show, he was pumped. He said, even the guys making the plays, like I just said, they still have great coverage around them. And it felt like only having 14 practices with Lynn's defense. And it wasn't crazy. The scheme was still very vanilla. It was, let's go out there and see how we can play, right? Simple zone, simple man coverages here, nothing too crazy, but let's see if guys can be productive. And what we have going forward, they passed the test with flying colors. It was awesome to see, and like I said, very encouraging going into summer and going into fall camp. Now we can take that next step with the coverages, knowing that we have playmakers on the back end to do it. And one of the top players, too, that we have at Crawford, John Humphrey from UCLA wasn't even out there, who was in Danton Lynn's defense. So we were missing him, and we had younger guys step up, which is very encouraging.
I'm glad you mentioned John Humphreys, because I was about to mention how he also fits into that long, lanky mold, that cornerback type that Lynn likes.
Yeah.
What does that type of cornerback do for you as a defense?
Yeah, you're first of all physical at the line of scrimmage, right? You can play press man-to-man coverage. You can play against our wide receiver core, which we're going to get to in a little bit, is unbelievable, by the way. Eye test check. I mean, I'm so pumped. I think Jacoby Lane is going to have a huge year. Mekhi Lemon,
we're getting to that.
Anyways, but when you have those bigger corners,
Yeah.
you look at the NFL, Sauce Gardner type, guys like that, Jalen Ramsey, you can play man-to-man coverage against Jacoby Lane, who's very big, Deuce Robinson, who normally you have those sizes. And I'm not saying that you have to be that size now in college or the NFL to be productive at corner. That's just where it's starting to go to, right? It's a lot different than what it used to be. But for me, I think it's so important because not only do you add a great physicality factor on man-to-man press coverage, recovery speed, right? We saw that on the first third down. Jacoby Lane got behind DeCarlos Nicholson. Deep ball by Miller Moss, but he had that recovery, the 6'3" frame, go back and get a hand on the football and break that play up, even though we got out of position, is so big. But you also add a factor with tackling, right? You have guys that can come up and be physical. They can take on a Derrick Henry type body. They can take on these different types of bigger running backs that we're going to see in Blake Corum, guys that you're going to see, and obviously he's gone now, but you get those type of running backs in the Big Ten. We have guys that not only can cover on the outside, but also can come up and be physical in the run game as well.
Well, we've also seen the last 2 years how USC struggled with a bigger, longer tight end as well. And heading to the Big Ten, having a longer, lanky corner, does that give you more options as far as how to defend that type of tight end?
Yeah, and the Big Ten is, in my opinion, tight end or I guess tight end conference you would call it, because they are just Iowa, Michigan, Ohio State, year in and year out. They're producing these pass-catching tight ends that are so dominant. And like you said, we struggled with Dalton Kincaid. We struggled with Michael Mayer at Notre Dame consistently. We struggled with Ferguson last year against Oregon. We just didn't have someone that could really play, especially in man-to-man, play on those tight end type bodies and be physical and stay in great coverage. Now, there were flashes last year of it, but the consistency wasn't there. So for me, it's exciting because when you have these taller corners and multiple of them, 3 or 4 guys that are that size, you can put on the field at the same time a DeCarlos Nicholson, a Jacoby Covington, bring John Humphrey into the slot, or Nicholson in the slot and play on that tight end. Or if we get a shorter, faster team that doesn't have dominant tight ends, then you bring in a Jalen Smith or a Prophet Brown to play those quicker guys in the slot. So it gives you more options and more versatility on defense, and that's something that we've talked about with Denton Lynn's defense. I love that. I love the different fronts that we got in or that we've seen him do. They didn't really do it in the spring game, but the different fronts, different combination of DBs with nickel, with dime, the different linebackers out there. We saw clips against us last year where you have 5 defensive ends on the field, no interior defensive linemen. So it gives you so much opportunities to be versatile, to be dynamic on defense. And I love that we have guys that are stepping up and making plays with the first unit, second unit, even the third unit. And then you had Marcellus Williams in there as well, a guy that can cover some bigger guys outside. So, I mean, it's just the sky's the limit right now with the secondary. And I'm not, again, overreacting. I'm not getting too far ahead. But this is where the spring game for me is encouraging because of individual performance. And I thought the corners absolutely passed that test.
Now, you just mentioned this, but obviously we know coming into a spring game that on both sides of the ball, it's going to be relatively vanilla. You're not going to put a lot of tape for your opponent to see and prep the rest of the offseason. But as far as what we saw from Lynn's defense and what we've seen on tape in games from Lynn's defense, how did this compare?
It was night and day against us last year.
Well, sure.
And what I mean by that is what I just said. Like he's not showing the recipe to beat us, right? That's not what he's going to do in a spring game, because if he shows the recipe how to stop Lincoln Riley's offense, like we did last year, we struggled. We had some big time plays in that game against UCLA, but if he does that again, especially now facing them day in and day out, everyone's going to watch the spring game and go, okay, let's just do what they did. Yeah. No, who better to beat your own opponent than your defense that you see, or to beat yourself than the defense that you face every day. So he kept it very vanilla, but he still allowed guys to flourish in that defense and show what they can do. But overall, I mean, again, not a ton of pressures. It started off, the game was very just 4-man rush. You know, they started in that 2 interior defensive linemen, and the starting defense, for me, obviously, Bear Alexander being out with an injury, Jalen Smith, another guy, but it was Kobe Pepe, I think, in the middle, and then Nate Clifton in the middle, and then outside was Anthony Lucas and Jameel Muhammad. Not really surprised there. And then Lucas and Braylon Shelby were rotating for that first position, or for that starting DN spot, if you will. But I just love that he allowed a 4-man rush to start off the game. Let's just let you 4 go get after the quarterback. We're not sacking, obviously not tackling, but use some of your skills, work some of your pass rushes. A little bit throughout the game, he started bringing some more pressure and some more linebacker blitzes, a couple DB blitzes, but again, very vanilla. Things that you would expect to see in a spring game. Gave the offense just enough trouble, right? Still won the game or the spring game, but didn't show too much to how to stop a Lincoln Riley offense and all that. But overall, I thought it was great, you know, and the most exciting part for me was how simple he kept it. We still were effective on defense, right? We still can make plays with what we have. And we talked about, you hire the perfect defensive staff, right? You get a great defensive coordinator, all the coaches around him, you still have to have the pieces of the puzzle, right? You still have to have the chess players to make it happen, or the chess pieces to make it happen. And guys are stepping up a lot quicker than I thought maybe they would. And you know, again, I'm trying to listen to my inner thoughts of don't overreact. But I and you could feel it in the Coliseum as well with the fans. It was a very encouraging day for the defense.
Well, you mentioned it with the Marcellus pick. We've talked about the key to being a versatile defense for Lynn is knowing your assignment, knowing the how and why and when that you're doing what you're doing. Yeah. Did it look like that on Saturday?
It did. Now, it's tougher for me to answer that because I'm not in the film room. Like, even on like some of those plays, a guy could make a play and he could be in the wrong spot.
Sure.
Right? Guy could have, he made a sack or he got a tackle for loss, but he didn't do the right assignment. But again, when you're learning a new defense, or even as a quarterback or a player on offense, when you come in, when you're first learning, you're going to make mistakes. Just make them at 110%, right? And that's what the coaching staff wants to see. That's what the players want to see. That's what the leaders around you want to see from the younger guys. And it felt like they were doing that. It really felt like, again, I don't know if they were doing exactly their perfect assignment. There were probably a good amount of missed assignments, or MAs as we call them, once you watch the film on Sunday. But overall, it felt like that was a defense that was flying around.
Confident.
Most important for me was flying to the football. I know we only tackled when we got to maybe the third, I don't want to call it the threes, but the third unit, or some of the younger guys allowed them to get a little bit of college level tackling and kind of experience live action in the Coliseum. But outside, and you don't want to get your starters hurt. I get that. But it felt like guys were flying to the football better. I know, again, we weren't tackling, but they were in the right place, right time. There were multiple times on film where you saw 4 or 5 jerseys around the football, as opposed to last year, maybe 1 or 2 guys, or guys not giving up on the play, but not being as aggressive. You can tell that this coaching staff has put a huge emphasis on tackling, getting to the football, and not giving up on a play. And probably the most exciting part for me was, and that's something that Lincoln talked about, is the vibe of this football team, is when the younger guys made a play, the starters weren't checked out. They weren't on the sideline waiting for what they were going to do for spring break or getting excited for the three horns to be done with the day or signing autographs. They were locked in. They were jumping up and down when younger guys were making plays. It just felt like a great team atmosphere. And this is what Lincoln Riley has preached about, the culture that you want to have of a team. It really feels like that right now, and especially on defense. So that is so exciting to see as someone that's followed this team for the last couple of years. And I can't wait to see that improvement as they continue to go on.
And I mentioned the word confidence because it just felt like there was this overall buy-in and belief in each other, belief in their coaches. And it points to what you're talking about, that celebration when the quote-unquote third teamers were doing things. So it was cool to see that, like, they were almost re-energized in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, repetition builds that belief. Repetition builds that confidence. And it's only been 14 practices. And it was encouraging to see the product on the field on Saturday. Now, again, was it perfect? No. Were there still explosive plays from the offense, guys out of position here and there, and things that, you know, you've got to clean up going into fall? Absolutely. But overall, for it to be that short of an install, right, only to have 5 weeks and then go into a spring game, to be able to have that much success on Saturday was awesome to see. But I love, and I think the belief part real quick before we move on is a big part of that is because of what we've heard Lynn talk about, right? He said, I don't have a set scheme to where you have to fit in this or else you can't play for me, right? You have to fit this mold or I'm not going to have you on the field. I'm going to tailor my defense to the guys that I have. I'm going to allow you to believe in yourself, to play confident, to let you excel and do what you do best, and to really showcase that within my defense, within my scheme. And I think that's a big part of like you said, the confidence, the belief in this defense, in what Coach Lynn and his staff is doing, is because guys are feeling like they can make an impact in their own way, and they don't have to be a certain type of player to really play in this defense. They can do what they do best, and Lynn's going to find ways to use them within his scheme, and I love that. I think that gives you so much confidence as a player, and it allows you to play as a unit and really build trust in the guys around you.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. One last thing for me before we go to our next topic. You mentioned it, and I agree with you. I wasn't really surprised by the quote-unquote first team that we saw, especially when you account for injuries. Any takeaways from who they're placing in starting roles?
No, I mean, I think obviously safety was no surprise with Kamari Ramsey because of how highly Lincoln, he said he was the most consistent player, complete player on both sides of the football. Keely Arnold was back there. I think the corners were Nicholson and Jacoby Covington. I think that competition is going to still go into the offseason and
especially
then obviously
with John
fall
Humphreys.
camp. Linebacker for me, not too surprised there with the starting unit. It was Mason Cobb and then Mascarenas Arnold. When you go too deep, I know Rajon Davis has been dealing with some injuries, but the second unit was Eric Gentry and Desmond Stevens, a freshman who I thought had some flashes on Saturday. Eric Gentry did work back in with that first unit, though, later in the game. So, again, I think those three guys, and then when Davis gets healthy, we saw him a little bit when he's fully back healthy. I think those three guys, maybe four, are going to continue to compete for that spot, but that's going to be a position battle that I'm going to pay close attention to. And then defensive line is, I think, still up in the air, right? Because of what Lynn does. You're going to see so many different guys out there, but the starters, again, were Pepe, Nate Clifton were the two interior guys, and the outside was Anthony Lucas, Jamil Muhammad with Braylon Shelby rotating in. So we saw all those guys with the first unit. Throughout the game, it got mixed up a little bit, but I pay attention really to who goes out first, right? Because that's because our guys are on rep counts as well, right? They're not going to put some of the guys that are solidified starters out there until the end of the game. But when you look at those first units that go out, and especially right now talking about the defense, not any big surprises. Got to get some other guys healthy, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And I think you're going to see, a set group of starters, but I think we're going to see a lot of guys rotate this year and make an impact.
No, yeah, it'll be exciting to see. I'm glad we got to see what this Trojan defense under Lynn looks like, because we've been only looking at UCLA footage, so now that we actually got to see it with this Trojan roster, it was definitely fun to see.
Yeah, well, it's tough too, and that's what I said last week's episode. It's tough too because we can watch that game, but also just hearing quotes, right? We didn't get to really talk about what's happening inside Howard Jones Field. Yeah. Now that it's public knowledge and we saw it and it was a live game, we can get a little more in depth to it. But again, I think I've said it probably 5 times, but the word I'm sticking with from watching the spring game was, again, don't overreact, but very encouraging. Very encouraging things that happened, both with the scheme and with individual players.
For sure. Now I want to go to the other side of the ball, talking about USC's quarterback competition. But before we do, just want to give a thanks to Audi. Performance is more exhilarating on a real road. Introducing the Audi Q5. Visit your SoCal Audi dealers, proud sponsors of the USC Trojans. And at Ralph's, everyone wins when it comes to saving big, because when you order online through the Ralph's app, you get the same great prices, deals, and rewards on pickup or delivery that you do in store. So no matter how you shop, you always save big at Ralph's. Ralph's, fresh for everyone. Fight on.
Fight on.
Okay, like we mentioned, the quarterback competition. Obviously, this was the most important thing that we were going to look for on the offensive side of the ball. So I'm going to start with the stat lines from both Moss and Maeva. So Miller finished 16 of 21 for 133 yards with 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. And then Maeva finished 15 of 17 for 172 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Now, I'm going to start overall because we got multiple questions about this. Did you feel like the interceptions were a bad sign for USC's offense or a good sign for USC's defense?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of both. Could have been a little bit better ball placement there by the quarterbacks on those picks, but also good coverage. And starting with the first one from Maeva, it was an underthrown football, something that he would like to have back. But again, it was a great job by DeCarlos Nicholson forcing Jacoby Lane to the sideline, but that works, both ways. As a quarterback, you want Jacoby Lane to be able to stack the DB. And what I mean by that is get on top of them, allow the quarterback to have space to throw the football over the top, or use a sideline. Nicholson pushed Jacoby Lane to the sideline. If I'm Maeva and I go back and watch that film, I'm saying, hey, it's either a high and away back shoulder or we're not throwing that throw, right? It was just a poorly underthrown ball. It almost felt like wasn't forced, but he was put too much trust in Lane to be where he was supposed to be, which is fine, but the accuracy was not there as well. And then when you go to the next one, back to back, the very next play, Miller Moss comes back, and we talked about that, a great play. That's a combination because Marcellus Williams did make a great play on that, but you've also got to have the arm strength and the accuracy to make that throw, and you've got to trust yourself to make that throw. It felt like Miller kind of aimed it like, all right, it's there, but I don't know if I'm fully confident to make that. The same throw we saw from Caleb Williams against Oregon State to Jordan Addison to win the game in 2022. That was that same exact scenario. And when you make that decision, if you're a half second late and you don't get it there, and we saw how close it was with Caleb, right? The safety was an inch away from making that play, right? So that is a high level throw, which I know Miller can make. Just got to see a little bit more confidence when making that throw. The Jensen throw, it's kind of the same exact thing. It was a hole shot again. I think the ball got tipped. You couldn't really see on the TV copy, but I'm pretty sure that ball got tipped, so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt there. And then the last one by Miller, which was the pick six by Prophet Brown, I'm throwing that throw as well. I'm sure any quarterback would, right? You have a one-on-one slant route there, you're going to throw it. It could have maybe been a little bit lower. That's why I got tipped up in the air, but I like it. It was front shoulder. Just an amazing play on the football, and Prophet Brown being in the right place, right time, took it back to the house. So, again, I'm going to be more so on, hey, let's be a little better at the quarterback position, protecting the football, but you got to give credit where credit's due, and I think the DBs did a good job of making plays on the ball.
So overall, just competitive play and not areas of concern, or?
I'm a quarterback, so overall, let's not turn the football over.
Sure.
I'm going Lincoln Riley mindset here, so overall, I'm saying, hey, Maeva, I've seen you're better than that. Don't make that throw. Miller, don't force that throw, right?
Yeah.
Throw it away, check it down, or throw it earlier with confidence, get a little more power on that football and know you can make that. Again, Jensen, the ball got tipped. Can't really do anything about that. And then the last throw from Miller, though, I'm going to say, hey, it's down here in the red zone, low and away. If it doesn't get, you want to have the ball at about, especially on slant routes, right? We're always taught front hip, especially when you're in tight coverage, because that eliminates the ball getting tipped up in the air. When you go chest to shoulder to helmet height and a DB comes through, that ball has more of a chance to get popped up. When it's low and the receiver can turn his hands down like this, if it's not caught, it's through his arm and it's hitting the ground, right? Especially in the red zone when things happen a lot quicker. So that one's tough to be too critical on Miller on the last pick, but overall, I'm going, hey, quarterbacks, we're meeting. We can't have 4 interceptions no matter what the outcome is or what the issue is. That can't happen in a game.
Gotcha. Okay, now I want to go quarterback by quarterback here. Yeah. Moss, what did you make of his performance overall?
Yeah, I think it was a very up and down day for Miller. I think he started out a little slow getting into the game, but once he really got in a rhythm, you could see that confidence come through. And even though that play ended with a pick down there from Prophet Brown, that was a very good drive leading up to that. And then also the last drive of the game that finished in the end zone, you could really see the difference from those 2 drives to the other drives. And what I mean by that is you could tell when he was in a rhythm, when he was confident, when he was out there playing with a little bit of swagger, I guess, if you will, playing like he was in the Holiday Bowl, a chest bumping and fist pumping out there, excited, letting his emotions come through. And it's tough as a quarterback because you've got to really flirt with that line of confident and cocky. You can't be out there and be arrogant and do all these things. You still got to be humble and try to keep that even keel, because you're going to have a lot of highs and a lot of lows. But when the lows happen, or when you throw that pick, you don't want to see, and I only say this because on the TV copy you could see his face a little bit. It felt like he was a little down on himself, or not really feeling that confident or that same excitement that we saw in the bowl game. That's something I want to see from Miller day in and day out. Like, hey, this is my job. I'm the guy. You don't have to act like that all the time, but like, I'm the guy. Come take this from me, right? This is my quarterback one spot. I'm going to go out there and earn it. I've been here. I've paid my dues. I just want to see a little bit more confidence and swagger from Miller. And like I said, when he gets in a rhythm and he's playing well and playing fast, you do see that, but I just want to see that all the time, right?
Yep.
And I think overall, I don't think he hurt himself in any way on Saturday, but I don't think he solidified that job as well, right? And it's tough to say that because, again, the spring game's a spring game. Those 14 practices are far, far more important, especially as a quarterback, because you're working day in and day out. You're building those relationships with those guys, especially the younger guys that are coming into play, working with the offensive line. We don't see all of that on Howard Jones that we saw on Saturday.
Yeah.
But for me, overall, like I said, I don't think he did anything to take a step back, but I don't think both guys really solidified themselves as a candidate going forward. And I know Lincoln said, if I had to pick today, then I would go with Miller because of his time in the offense, because of repetitions. But again, I think that competition is still going to be open. But for Miller, it was awesome to see, again, up and down, but for him to bounce back and finish the game strong when things weren't going well early on.
Well, it was interesting. Riley talked about the trajectory that both quarterbacks had over the course of spring. He said that Miller was kind of slow to start, had kind of like iffy practices, and then got hot and kept getting hot towards the spring game. And then Maeva was good at the start, took a dip in the middle, this is per Riley, and then got hot right at the end. So it's interesting hearing the trajectory because it kind of is almost opposite of each other in that sense.
Yeah, and you know, when it's QBU here at USC, right? When you're fighting for the starting quarterback position, and Yogi Roth, got to give a shout out to him, was the broadcaster on the Pac-12 network for the game, and he said it very well. He said, when you're a commit or you sign to USC, you become a household name. When you become the starter at USC, you become a Heisman Trophy candidate. You go to that next step, that next level, because of the greats that played here at the quarterback position at USC with the Leinerts and the Palmers and just those big name guys that made such an impact. You're filling the shoes of those guys. Caleb Williams just won a Heisman Trophy, right? So the next guy that takes over, you're expected to continue that tradition. So for me, you can't. Now you're going to have ups and downs. That's going to happen, right? And I said that. There's going to be highs. There's going to be lows. But when it comes to being a leader, to being the guy, you have to keep that same attitude day in and day out on the field, in the film room, in the locker room, and for both those guys going in this competition, you can't have a roller coaster and you can't start slow and then get hot. It has to be, I'm continually getting better. You can't be up and down, because when it comes to Saturdays, you only get 12 of them for the regular season, and then hopefully you get a playoff. You can't have 3 or 4 bad games at the beginning or in the middle. You have to be on it day in and day out, especially at the quarterback position. So I think for Riley, that's really where he's like, all right, who's going to be the most consistent and who's going to be the guy that we can lean on, even when like their bad days aren't as bad, right? That's something that we've heard Lincoln say, who's going to be that guy? And for me, Saturday, I don't know if either one of them really solidified that, but I don't think either one of them hurt themselves either. So I'm excited for this competition going forward, but it's still up in the air for me. I think it's still an open competition. Well,
we haven't talked about Maava's day yet. What did you see from him on Saturday?
Yeah, I thought Maava looked really good. Outside of that interception, I thought he had a very solid performance. It kind of went back to the episode where we broke down his film of what we saw at UNLV. That held true, but big, tall, athletic. We saw some good RPOs out of him. We saw some good zone reads where he pulled it and took off and run. I think his first 2 plays were actually a 2-back set, and both of them were zone read plays with a guard tackle pull. Throwing-wise, he's just a gifted thrower of the football, if you will. Very effortless when he throws it. Very accurate. Again, that was an underthrow on that interception, but going 15 of 17 on the day, if you told me that was the stat line, I'd take that every single day of the week. So I thought he showed you everything you needed to see to have confidence in him going forward, to keep him in this quarterback competition, and to keep pushing Miller to get better. I loved the way that he moved around in the pocket as well. I thought that was a big thing. That play to Jacoby Lane, I think on the second series, where he moved to the right, sidestepped, and then he hit Lane over the middle, and Jacoby made the unbelievable one-hand catch behind him. That was just good to see. Then the corner out to Zachariah Branch that Maava threw was some of the things that we saw on film. Rolling to his right, perfectly thrown football to the sideline. It was Zachariah Branch or nobody. So he really showed you everything you wanted to see. That's why I talk about his potential and what he can be, especially under Lincoln Riley. In my opinion, sky's the limit. The biggest thing for him right now, though, is just continue to study the playbook. Got to get comfortable in this offense. It's got to be more than just 14 practices to earn that job. You've got to keep that up through the summer and ultimately into fall camp as well.
Final question from me on this topic. You mentioned it and Riley did as well. Once you have a spring, you know what you need to work on. You know the concepts much better, obviously. If you quarterback Cody, if you will, were to give homework, what kind of homework would you give for Miller and Jaden for what you want to see from them?
Yeah, for Miller, for me, the biggest thing is keep building that confidence, right? And it kind of contradicts what I just said. It's tough because you're not named the starter yet, so you can't assert yourself really into that role, but still treat every day like that. Still to have that same confidence, that swagger. I'm fine with Miller being a little cocky, right? Flirt with that line. Don't go to arrogance, but I want to see a little bit more swagger, a little bit more control, a little bit more leadership out of him. And again, it's tough to just judge off of the spring game. I can't say what he did for the 14 practices. He could have been the most vocal guy out there. I just want to see that on game day as well. I want to see what that attitude he had at the bowl game. And then the other thing is continue to build timing with those younger guys. Work. He missed a couple throws here and there throughout the game over the middle where it was just hit the guy in the hand so they should catch it, but just off the fingertips, missed Jacoby Lane, just underthrew him a little bit on that go ball on third down. Just you've got to make those throws and continue to be accurate and be consistent with that. So throughout player ran practices, continue to work on timing with those guys and just overall mold your game. And then for me with Maava, just playbook. That is the best advice I can give him. Talent levels there, skill levels there. It looked a little bit more, in my opinion, like the offense ran a little bit more like when Caleb Williams was here because Maava has that ability to run a little bit, do those zone reads a little bit more than Miller. But I can't take it away from Miller. He had, I think, a 50-plus yard touchdown last year on the ground. So he's an athletic guy that can move around as well. But for Maava, it's got to be getting in your playbook and same thing. Continue throwing with these new guys. You've only had 14 practices. You've got to build that chemistry with them. But first and foremost is he needs to every single day spend at least an hour in that playbook and an hour in the film room if he really wants to win this starting job.
Alrighty, the third topic I want to talk about is just the others stepping up on offense. I know that we had talked about how new in some regard every position group on offense is. First one I want to talk about is Woody Marks / the state of USC's running back room. I believe when we were standing together watching the game, once the Trojan live show ended, you were pretty high on Woody Marks from the start. So I was just curious your evaluation of his day.
Yeah, he's probably the guy that I'm most excited about on offense, transfer-wise or newcomer-wise.
Okay.
On the offensive side of the ball. He's just a veteran player. I think he got a carry on the first play, and then on the third play, we saw that reception down the sideline, and that's what he's so good at. Amongst running backs in all of college football, he's leading in receptions and also receiving yards in the entire country. I think as a sophomore, he had over 85 receptions. So he can do pretty much everything you want out of a running back in today's era of college football, especially in Lincoln Riley's offense.
I was going to say perfect fit for
Perfect fit. Yeah. He's over 1,800 yards on the ground, over 1,200 yards through the air receiving. So he's just that dynamic player. It didn't surprise me that he was out there with the first group.
Yeah.
Kind of same from last year with Marshawn Lloyd, right? A newcomer that comes in.
Transfer portal veteran
being the
guy.
starter, guy that has all the potential to have a dominant year this year to make a huge impact, and we saw that early on, and that was awesome to see. Again, he got 2 of the first 3 touches to start the game, then he had another big run later in the game. That was about it that we saw from him, but it was enough for me to get excited and kind of hold true to what we've heard throughout the spring and also what we saw at Mississippi State. So, yeah, he's probably my favorite guy right now, or I wouldn't say favorite, most exciting or most intriguing guy on the offense as a newcomer that I think can make a huge impact this year, and he did a great job in the spring game of showing flashes of that already.
And definitely feels the need too, right?
Yeah, but that's not to discredit the other guys in the running back room as well, and the guys that have been here, right? You've got Quentin Joyner and Amarian Peterson, who I think can have a big impact this year as well. And I got excited about the freshman newcomer, Brian Jackson.
I know.
He had a couple big plays. There had a touchdown there, I think, later on in the game or towards around halftime in the game. But yeah, it just feels like, and that's USC football, right? It feels like, and even with the transfer portal today, but it was like that even before the portal opened up, just feels like there's always the next guy in line. We always continue to get good talent, especially on the offensive side of the ball more recently, and it's just so much fun to watch and learn and study these new players and then see them perform on Saturdays. So, yeah, I think Woody Marks is a guy right now, but again, there's 3, maybe 4 guys in that room that could work their way into that rotation.
Now, when looking at the wide receivers, I think we were all kind of curious, would that trio from the Holiday Bowl kind of replicate that going forward? It's a big role for them to fill collectively, and so I feel like they did a pretty good job of showing that they could handle it on Saturday, but I was curious what you thought. Yeah,
I'm so pumped. Whoever gets to play quarterback, I'm jealous. I really and that was a question mark, right? You lose Brendan Rice.
Yeah.
You lose Taj Washington, your two top receivers from a year ago. You return Kyron Hudson, who had a little bit of an impact here and there. But outside of that, you really didn't know. Zachariah Branch was a guy that played a lot last year, but he was more effective, in my opinion, with some of those gadget-type plays on special teams, with punt return, with kick return. We didn't see a ton of him as a receiver, which I'd like to see more this year. And we saw a little bit of that on Saturday, more so towards the end of the game. But outside of that, it's wide open, right? Someone step up and be that impact player, be that next big receiver here at USC. And in my opinion, we've got a lot of guys that can do that. You know, you have Jacoby Lane, who, I'm going out on a limb here. I think he's going to have the biggest year. I really think he's going to have the most impact this year. I am so impressed with him week in and week out, watching his film last year and watching the Holiday Bowl again on Saturday. He put that size on. And I get what you say I get what you said last week. He's got a big frame, so it doesn't look like 30 pounds game, but you can tell a little bit when he's in pads, when he's out there. But again, Mekhi Lemon had a huge game, 6 catches, 51 yards, and a touchdown. Beautiful catch, beautiful body control. There's a reason he was a 5-star receiver coming out of high school. And then Deuce Robinson, a guy who's made impact too. You know, had baseball as well throughout the spring, so he wasn't as effective as we saw. But
I don't know how he juggled both. Can I just say
which
that?
is unbelievable.
Unreal.
Going to baseball games and getting ready to go in spring practices, learning the playbook.
And then being a student.
Yeah, and then also being a student on top of all that. So it's awesome to see. But other guys that stood out, Jaden Richardson, the transfer from Tufts University, which we did a little preview on him. I think he's going to be a little sleeper pick to have more of an impact than people think going into this year. And then another guy, a freshman. Like I just talked about, these guys that come out of nowhere that make impacts. Xavier Jordan played well on Saturday. I know he was with some of the younger guys in the freshmen, but he showed what he can do when he gets the ball in his hands. So I'm so excited for this receiver core. It's a lot of young, hungry guys, I think. And the best part is Zachariah Branch, Jacoby Lane, Deuce Robinson, and Mekhi Lemon are all sophomores. They are all in the same exact class. That has to be the best young receiving core in the entire country. And again, you can call me biased, but they are so much fun to watch. Those are 4 guys that could be high impact player, could be wide receiver ones, really at a lot of places throughout the country, and we have them all on our same team.
Which is why I think going forward, it's kind of in the question mark area because the potential is so high, but they are young. You know, these are big shoes to fill for them. And I'm not saying that I doubt them that they won't be able to do that, but it is a big ask. So, you know, best case scenario, they're able to fill in that role, and then you have them for another year as juniors. I mean, that is exciting when you think about it like that.
Well, the most exciting part, too, is we didn't lose one of them. You know, normally when you get 4 top players like that in the same room with today's era of college football, you expect 1 or 2 of them to transfer. All 4 of them came back. They stuck together. They said, hey, we want to build this unit up, and I'm so excited for that. That means these are guys that want to be here, that want to go out there and compete, that want to perform. And with Lincoln's offense, you understand if you're not one of the first 3 guys out when we go 11 personnel or 3 wide personnel, you're still going to play a good amount, right? You're still going to rotate a lot. We had a lot of guys. There were so many games last year where we kept saying 10 different guys cut a pass, 11 different guys, 9 different people, you know, so it was – they're going to spread the football around in this offense. It's just really who's going to be your backside, your X, your single receiver, who's going to be your go-to guy in crunch time, who's going to be your Brendan Rice or Taj Washington from last year, your Jordan Addison from 2 years ago. If you want to go even farther back, you can go to or Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah. Who was there on
Drake,
Saturday?
Drake London, guys like that. Who's going to be that guy? For me, it was Nelson Aguilar, Juju Smith. You know, so it's so much fun for those guys to continue to compete and work their way into those roles, but it's a great problem to have if you're Lincoln Riley in this offense.
For sure. Now, final thing I want to say on this topic when we're looking at the offense, the offensive line, we correctly predicted.
Hey.
Congrats.
Oh, yeah, we did.
Were you just clapping?
I was giving them credit, though. I thought they played well. That's what I was going to get into. But yes, no, go ahead.
We correctly, or I should say you correctly, predicted the starting 5 for USC's offensive line. To be fair, we knew one of them out of the 5. Yeah. So, you know, wasn't that hard to guess.
It was an assumption, yeah. And yes. I haven't seen one practice this year, so we just,
pat on the back.
I know a little football here and there. Give me a little credit.
Well, you were clapping for their performance, so I'm curious what you thought there.
Yeah, I was, and again, I know it wasn't a crazy different types of looks day, I guess, if you will, for Denton Lynn's defense. They weren't game planning against us like they did last year against UCLA. They weren't going with the 5 DNs. They weren't going with a ton of different looks on pressure. But overall, I thought the offensive line played better than what I expected. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but when you have a new first-year center, which is outside of quarterback the most important position on the offensive line or on the offense as a whole, and you have younger guys playing, Alani Noah, who's now going into his second year. You have Elijah Page, who is a freshman. You have Emmanuel Pregnon, although he's an older guy. had only been here for a year, and then Mason Murphy, who's kind of a staple on this offensive line. We've seen him move around, but you have a unit that's never played together before. You have a unit that has never seen Jonah Monheim at center, so I didn't know what to expect. I thought there were going to be some, and there was a couple false starts. There was a couple low snaps from Monheim. There was a couple missed assignments, if you will, but overall, I thought they had a great day. I thought they played well against a good defensive line, against some linebacker and safety pressures that Lynn brought. And again, it was vanilla, but overall, I'm giving them, I wouldn't say A, B plus in that range. So I was very happy with that, especially in pass protection. But you got to take it with a grain of salt because they're not calling sacks. You know, you're not being that physical, and you're also in the run game. You're just tapping on the hips. So it's really hard to grade an offensive line in a spring game. But from what I saw and watching the film back, that first unit I thought played very well.
It's funny because it's almost like you read what I was about to say. We got a question from Will who said, what's your grade on the offensive line performance, which you already answered. And then he said, any areas of pressing needs or concerns there?
Yeah, well, I'm going B+. I think B+ is a fair grade. From what the spring game, I guess, how do you say that? What the spring game is. Yeah. Take it as face value, I guess.
Sure.
Not allowing sacks.
Vacuum,
not tackling in the run game with the first unit. But yeah, well, I'm going B+ there for them. And I just think the biggest thing for the offensive line now is continue to build that consistency, but we've got to get a little more depth. And if that means going to the portal,
which it sounds like they will,
and getting some guys, I'm all for that. It has to happen. You've got some injuries on the offensive line as well. Some younger guys that are competing. Some guys that have been here that are competing, but I think overall we need to add some more depth on the offensive line because, knock on wood, I hate to see it happen, but injuries are going to happen.
Yeah.
Guys may not perform as well as they should, and kind of like last year, right? We talked about how important it is for that starting five to build that consistency and that continuity, but if 4 are producing and 1's not, or 3 are and 2 aren't, you have to make changes. You know, you can't keep doing the same thing and expecting the results to happen if those 5 aren't working well together. So it'd be good to have some more backups and some other guys with starting caliber talent that could rotate in if they needed to.
I thought it was interesting. Riley said after the game that the offensive line, as it looks right now, looks a little bit bigger than what they've had the last 2 years. And he said it's starting to look like what USC offensive line should look like, quote unquote. And he said that he was said something to the effect of, seems like we're going to get more push this year. Is that something that you can see right now, or do you have to wait to see until you can make that call?
No, I absolutely agree. And I a guy I'd like to bring up too, Elijah Page. We talked about how well he played in the bowl game. I thought he played great on Saturday. He did good in pass protection. He did a good job with the double team blocks with Emmanuel Pregnon. I liked seeing him pull around those guard tackle pulls. I think it was Maava's or one of the earlier plays in the game was a guard tackle pull, and he was in there. And it's fun to see those big athletic type of guys. Those are guys that I played with when I was here at USC, and those are the guys that you remember from even the Chris O'Dowd days and back then, and guys that I watched when I was growing up, the Matt Khalil days, those type of players. So it was fun to see. Lonnie Noah, I think, is another guy too that's going to have a big impact, a younger guy who earned the start last year for the first game of the year, went through some growing pains, but now he has that confidence. He's not a big wide-eyed rookie anymore, a freshman. He's now a sophomore player, a guy coming into his second year. So I'm with Lincoln. I think the offensive line look test, check, and then Jonah Monheim is a tackle body playing center, right? 6'5", 300 plus. So yeah, the size is there to go compete in the Big Ten. Now they just got to continue to build that consistency, and also the next step is, and we have guys that can compete to take some of those starting jobs, but you want to get a little bit more depth there in case things happen throughout the year.
I thought it was interesting, too. Riley basically said that Page and Murphy had basically solidified their spots at tackle. So it shows you, we always
doesn't
say
surprise me,
spring game, but apparently that's held true for the other 14 practices as well.
And that's where they earned that. That's exactly it. And like you said, the spring game is what it is, right? Monheim, I don't even think he played after a couple series, right? He comes out and some of those vets or the starters in there weren't in there throughout the entire game, but that's where you earn that starting job going into summer and fall camp is those 14 practices leading up to the spring game. So that's good news. That's great to hear. I'm glad Coach Riley and Coach Henson have the confidence in those guys. Again, I think Elijah Page is going to be a very, very good football player, and obviously Mason Murphy is an experienced guy who knows how to get it done on Saturdays.
One more topic from me. I just wanted to highlight something I thought was interesting. So after the game, head coach Lincoln Riley was asked, is there anything from this spring that you can check off as you don't have to search for any more answers in this area? And I was expecting more position battle or a need that we have. And he actually talked about the personality of the team. I'll just read the quote. He said, I think the biggest thing that I'm most excited about is just the vibe of this team. I really like the team. I really like coaching the team. I like the way they interact with each other. I like the way they compete with each other. I guess the future and all that like he basically said, what happens in the next 8 or 10 months will determine whether or not it's a good thing, but it feels different at this point of camp. So I thought that was interesting. And now we've heard both players and now head coach talk about the quote unquote vibe of the team. And it just seems like this roster feels better as far as a chemistry standpoint. I'm just curious, from someone who's been on many teams, Cody, your read on this quote.
Yeah, I love that, because one of the most important things as a team is finding your identity, right? Who are we? What are we good at? How are we going to win on Saturdays? And this team going into this offseason was like a blank canvas, right? It didn't feel like last year, right? We had Caleb Williams returning Heisman Trophy winner. We knew what to expect on offense. We knew where we needed to improve on defense. It really felt like we knew what the storyline was going to be and what the team was going to be like going into last year. This year, it's the complete opposite, right? New quarterback, new defensive coordinator, new defensive staff, new running back coach, new transfer guys, which is how college football is nowadays. But I just love it because it allows Lincoln Riley to reemphasize the culture, reemphasize what he expects, how to build that championship mentality. And it forces the players to come together, right? They don't have one guy who's returning that they can lean on, or a couple of guys that they can lean on, which they have some leaders on the team. But overall, it is, I think, one of the most open position battles on both sides of the football that we've seen, not only from Lincoln Riley, but in recent history here at USC. So when I say blank canvas, I mean that the sky's the limit for this team, but also to Lincoln's point. Could it be a bad thing as well? Could you have things that fall apart that don't go as well? Yes, absolutely. But it's up to the players to not allow that to happen. It's up to Coach Riley and his coaching staff to build that culture to not fail. And it's so awesome to see that Lincoln's seen it go in the right direction. And the perfect example for me, and I get the chills talking about this because it takes me back to 2014 year under Sark, when there was a lot of question marks under a first-year head coach, what the team was going to look like, all these different things. I go back to Saturday when the younger guys are making plays and the older guys aren't checked out. They're not getting ready to sign autographs. They're not figuring out what party they're going to after the game. They're not doing all that stuff, which you can do in the locker room, but you're still locked in to the guys that, even the walk-ons that are competing, that want to get an opportunity to play in front of their families. And you see guys like Miller Moss jumping up and down. You see Mason Cobb hyping up the younger linebackers making plays. You see guys going crazy on the sideline when Prophet Brown takes a pick six. That is what is so encouraging to me. And that's what that quote kind of speaks to me about this team, is that there's just a different feeling about this team as a whole, again, because we don't really know what to expect, but it allows them to find their identity. And they're doing a great job of that this spring. And I can't wait to see what team Lincoln continues to build going into the offseason and going into fall camp.
For sure. No, that was great. I feel like I have nothing else to add on that point.
Yeah, no, I'm just, it's a great quote to have. I love that, and I'm glad you put that quote in there when you kind of did the rundown, because I love that Lincoln said, this isn't who we are, this and this is this is how we're going to win. He said, hey, I love the vibe. I just love what this team's about. I love the way they're coming together. I love how they're learning from one another. And I'm just really excited for this team to find that identity going into summer PRPs and ultimately into fall camp. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Alrighty, well, any other thoughts before we go into questions?
No, I'm good. I feel confident going into summer. I feel confident going into fall. Again, not overreacting. It's just a spring game, but I feel like we learned a lot about this team, and I feel good going forward in the rest of this offseason, and hopefully this team's ready to go in the fall. This
is a genuine question, and I know you probably will hate it, but when would you feel quote unquote bad about a spring game? You know what I mean? Because everyone says oh, you win the press conference. It's so easy to win the press conference. Does that apply to a spring game, or is this actual tangible things that we'll see in fall?
No, I think, it's tough because, like you said, the win the press conference is the best thing, because if you're having a bad spring, even as a coach, you're not going to get out there and say, we're terrible, this is going to be a bad year, we don't have the play. You're never going to hear that. I don't believe at all that that's the case. I really felt good about the playmakers that we have. I would be worried if the stat line was, now I know 4 interceptions is frustrating, but when you're playing yourself, you got to look at both sides, right? I'm excited that we had 4 interceptions, but I'm also frustrated that we threw 4 picks. But then you look at some of those great catches that we had from the receiver core, but also great coverage that we had from the secondary. So I guess you would feel bad if it was just a dominated, one-sided, not spring game, but spring as a whole, to where the offense won every single day, or the defense won every single day, and the coaches may say that, or hey, we've got to get better, and you're not getting better, right? And then the spring game comes around. Say all 14 practices, the offense dominated. And then we get to the spring game and the offense wins 50-20, right? Then it'd be like, shoot, we didn't fix that. Or the defense dominated every single day, and the offense goes out and puts a goose egg up, right, and doesn't score 1 point,
Yeah.
right? So you want to see flashes of both to feel confident going forward. That would be for me. And if it was one-sided the entire day, again, don't overreact, but that's where the cause for concern for me would come from.
Okay.
I felt like we saw flashes from both sides that made me feel good, especially on the defensive side of the ball where we absolutely need to improve on this season.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Alrighty, let's go into questions. But before we do, just want to give a thanks to Audi. What if there was a portal to the future? Enter the fully electric Audi Q4 e-tron with an advanced touchscreen infotainment system. Audi, the future awaits. And take your health to the next level with Symbiotica. Their premium, easy-to-take supplements fuel your body with key vitamins and minerals to help you reach peak performance on and off the field. Elevate your health today by going to Symbiotica.com and use code FIGHTON for 15% off site-wide.
Right on.
Now we got a question from Avery who said, what are we going to do with all these DBs? How many is too many? Isn't the Big Ten run first?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. Some teams are getting to more of that. Like last year, Nebraska, especially when they played TCU early on, you're seeing a little bit more of a pass-heavy offense, but then you play Iowa.
But you're still playing like the
football.
Washington, Oregon, and UCLA.
Yeah, we're absolutely going to. Yeah, that's a great point. We have Washington and UCLA both on schedule this year. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of what we talked about. That's why I think Lynn, and he already had that from a year ago, but we're recruiting as well, not only in the portal, but some of these younger guys, those bigger type of corners, guys that can play outside, guys that can play inside on a tight end and also be great in run support. So that's where I feel comfortable about that, especially with you add DeCarlos Nicholson. Go watch DeCarlos Nicholson's I couldn't, there wasn't like a huge cut up on YouTube, but go watch, I think he has a Twitter highlight. Watch him come up and hit. Watch him come up and be physical. Jacoby Covington, a guy that's put on size that looks bigger even than he did a year ago. Then we get John Humphrey, a guy who was physical against us last year. So we have those physical bodies at corners that can cover in man-to-man, but also can come up and tackle in the backfield, and that's going to be big in the Big Ten. But that's a great question, right? You got to have secondary players that can come up and hit. You also look more at safeties to do that than your corner position, and we have that back on the back end as well.
I'm going to combine the next two questions. IGCWD said, what improvements do you see from our defense when comparing to last year's team? And Darren said, glad you're back. Thank you. What are the biggest differences you see with this defensive coaching staff versus the prior regime?
Biggest improvement-wise so far is tough to say because obviously it's just a spring game that we've seen since Lynn has been here. But going off of that game, kind of what we talked about, I thought coverage was amazing. You know, having those 4 interception guys being in the right place the entire game was awesome. And even when we did give up a big play here or there in the pass game, guys did a great job of recovering. And the other thing for me was rallying to the football. Getting to the football. I know we couldn't tackle, but rallying to the football, seeing a bunch of Cardinal helmets swarm the football on the defensive side. I love seeing that. That shows a team that's being taught how to tackle, but also to be sure tacklers and make sure there's not just one guy there that can miss, but you have 3, 4, 5, 6 guys getting to the football. So for me on the spring game, just with the small sample size we've seen, that's a big improvement from last year. And the coaching staff, I mean, it's just, where do you start? You know, We've talked about them all off season, and it's no disrespect to the coaches that have been here before, but you hire, and in my opinion, a championship caliber defensive staff, starting with Lynn. Then you get Ince, who's a FCS national championship winning head coach. You get Doug Belk, who was highly recommended, was part of that Alabama crew in 2016. And then you also add in Coach Henderson, who, in my opinion, is probably the best motivator on the entire staff.
Sure.
Or especially the defensive side of the ball. So I think it's phenomenal what Lincoln Riley and Jen Cohen have done for that side of the football, and we saw flashes of that in the spring game. Now,
Eric's question uses a phrase that I actually haven't said in a while. He said meat and potatoes question.
Yeah, you haven't said that.
I know.
Well, we haven't podcasted
kind of
in 2
like
months.
That too. But it's like an in-season thing, you know, like
there you go.
The meat and potatoes. Anyway, he said, let's get to the elephant in the room, or should I say bear in the room. Do you think Bear didn't suit up to make sure he's healthy for fall and give the youngsters some playing time, or do you think he could be dealing with a minor injury? We have heard from Lincoln Riley he is dealing with an injury. He actually said on the 247 podcast that he has a hamstring. So he said that.
And you don't. Yeah, and so that's, I guess, to Eric's question. Or finish. What else did he say about that?
He was just going to say Bear's been really frustrated because he wants to play this spring.
Okay, good. I'm glad you said that, because I feel like that's kind of a 2-part to what Eric just said. It answers both, to where maybe Lincoln's letting the younger guys get reps so he can learn from that, but also kind of protecting Bear from himself, who is probably itching to get out there and be with the team and compete, and especially with that whole rumor mill that went around about him. I love that he came out on Twitter and was like, I don't know what everyone's talking about. I'm a Trojan. Like, those are guys you love, and those, that tells me that he wants to be out there and be on the field with his brothers. But yeah, it's probably a combination of both of got to get healthy. And the hamstring, don't want to play with it.
Yeah.
You do not want to mess around with that. So I'm fully on. And it's, again, not to take away from spring and how those 15 practices can help, but it is just spring.
We also know what he can do.
Yeah, let's not risk any injury, especially to a vet type player who had a lot of production.
Okay, we got a question from Kevin who said, seems like the focus is really on the defense and checking out the players in the system, but then he clarified, what I was trying to say in my previous tweet was that does it seem like the focus was on the defense and the players in the schemes?
I'm assuming maybe more so than the offense is kind of what he's asking. But
I think so. Kevin, if you want to reply for the next episode, you can as well.
Well, I'm going to say from a two-part to this. First part of that is no, because your head coach is an offensive-minded coach. Obviously, there's a ton of emphasis on the offense. And even though the defense won this game, there were still positive flashes that we saw from the offense. I thought, like I said, the O-line played very well for being that unit for the first time together. Woody Marks was a great surprise in the running back room and someone that I'm excited about going forward. Some of the other running backs as well flash, but wide receiver room I think is going to be a lot better than a lot of people expect. And the quarterback competition, both played well, both had some mistakes. So, no, there's always going to be focus on the offense and a high emphasis on that on a Lincoln Riley football team. But is there more emphasis on the defense this offseason? Yes, because obviously we got a new defensive coordinator. Lincoln Riley has given up that quarterback coaching job title that he's had for such a long time to put more emphasis on the defense, to be more a part of the defense. Because, like I said in the previous episode, you have to learn the way that Lynn's going to teach. You have to learn the way that Lynn's going to coach. You have to learn Henderson's terminology. All these different coaches, Ince, Belk, all these new first-time coaches on the staff. Lincoln Riley wants to be a part of that and be around that. But would I say that there's more emphasis on the defense because that wasn't as good as it was last year? It needed to be better from last year? I wouldn't know, but I think more so because there's a new coaching staff. There's going to be more storyline. There's going to be more focus in the offseason, getting the defense up to speed because of the struggles that they've had over previous years.
Okay, I'm combining two questions again. Sean Tong said, what are Cody's wants and or needs in the transfer portal to improve the team even more? And Trudy said, if we can only take 3 transfers, what are the 3 positions?
I guess, so the first one kind of answers both. I'm going to say offensive line is a big need in the transfer portal. That's probably priority A for me. I think you could throw defensive line in there as well.
I think like an interior defensive lineman,
it would be 2 for me. A couple more guys on the interior would be nice to see. And then 3, I don't know.
That's an interesting one.
We're pretty stacked elsewhere. I think maybe linebacker. I wouldn't mind another linebacker.
Okay.
Especially with how, and I say that, let me elaborate, because of how physical the Big Ten is, how many hits you're going to take at that linebacker spot. You're going to be coming downhill play after play after play with Mascarenas Arnold, with Cobb, with Eric Gentry. You're going to continue to take those hits. The longevity of playing linebacker in the Big Ten is tough. Not saying it can't be done, but I wouldn't mind having a little bit more depth there, maybe a little bit more of a bruiser type of linebacker. If you want to know, Rajon Davis, once he gets fully healthy, will be able to fill in that role a little bit more. But yeah, I'd say I'd go O-line 1, D-line 2, focus on the trenches there this offseason in the portal. And then 3 for me, I would probably add linebacker, maybe 1 or 2 more guys that could be physical in the run game.
Will said, do you think we can win the Big Ten?
The Trojan in me that bleeds cardinal and gold says yes. I want to believe that.
Okay. The realist in you?
I want to say realist. I would say the more
rational?
Yeah, I guess realist. Okay, more realistic side of me is not no, but I'm going to tell you why it's going to be tough. Why it's going to be so difficult is because obviously this is, as much as we love that Lincoln talking about the vibe and this is a team that's learning their identity, you're also doing that in a year that you're going to a new conference that you're not familiar with. You're playing new teams that you've never played before. And you're going to have, and what I say is in recent years, you don't have film to go off of. Yeah. Like when we had, how to win the Pac-12, how to get to the Pac-12 championship. We knew how to beat certain teams. You're now facing a new conference that is entirely new from what we're used to, especially under Lincoln Riley. So that makes it more difficult. And also the Big Ten has changed from going a East champion and a West champion. Now it's just the top 2 teams. So that makes it even more difficult that you don't just have to win your side of the division. You have to be 1 or 2 in a Big Ten conference that's added now Washington, UCLA, Oregon, and SC as well. So that makes it more difficult.
Can't mess up.
Yeah, but The positive side of that is now the college football playoff.
True.
And I know everyone's like, are we talking about playoffs? But the college football playoff is now 12 teams. So if you aren't one of those 1 and 2 teams in the Big Ten, you could maybe sneak in still being a 3rd or 4th seed in the Big Ten conference. So I think it helps us in overall picture, even if we don't win the conference. But to win the conference in the first year, to even get to the conference championship, is going to be a very, very steep hill to climb. Do I think it's impossible? No. Do I think it's probable? That's where I'm a little torn. Again, the Trojan in me is going to say yes, and I'm always going to believe that we can go as far as we want to, and those are the expectations here at USC. But again, it's going to be a very difficult task. But we've got Lincoln Riley, and we've got a coaching staff and players that are hungry that I think can get it done.
Now, I don't know why I just realized this, but I realized recently that the schedule is home away, home away. It's like you don't get a back-to-back home series. I don't know about you, but just traveling for me, that's hard.
That's
going to
be tough. I don't travel with the team, so that's going to be
tough.
But
I just meant as a player.
But also the positive side of that is I was looking at the schedule. Our last East Coast, or I guess not East Coast, but Midwest game, cold game, if you will, besides maybe at Washington later in the year, is Minnesota.
Yeah.
So after that, it's pretty much all West Coast. So that's, I know the negative is home away, home away. There's not really a stretch, but we do have 2 byes as well.
Yeah.
So that's not, I think there's a bye after week 2. Get ready to go to Michigan right after. And I think we have a bye.
Crazy.
I think week 10 or 11 around there towards the end. And then we finish with 2 games at the end of the year. But yeah, it's this schedule. And I know we're getting a little off topic here, but it's this kind of answers how to win the Big Ten is unbelievable. And we thought last year was tough. Buckle up because we go LSU, Utah State, which is a non-conference, not easier opponent, but it's, I guess, a little bit of, but then you go straight to Michigan right after that. And then it's a Big Ten schedule the rest of the way. And we play Penn State, play Nebraska, who, up and down. I think Matt Rule's doing a good job there. But it's going to be some very difficult games. And you go at Washington, at UCLA, and then Notre Dame comes to town. So it's a tough schedule. And it's not just the back half like it was last year.
Yeah.
It's
the
pretty
back
much
half was like
you're starting with an SEC opponent and a neutral site. It's right from the get-go.
So here's my question then, because I feel like with Lincoln Riley's first year, I think there was a sense of urgency, obviously, because they didn't really know what to expect in that first year. And I feel like if you've been in the Pac-12 for a long time, you kind of can get lulled to sleep a bit from the routine. Will this newness kind of help the team in a sense that there is a sense of urgency and we don't fully know what we're expecting? So bring your A game every time. Does that make sense?
I think the pressure, I know exactly what you're saying, but I think the pressure is, and maybe it's a made-up pressure because we are USC and we feel like we are we are a powerhouse program in the country, and we have been for a long, long time. But it almost feels like, I don't know about a sense of urgency, but a sense of to prove that we belong, right? That we didn't make a mistake going to the Big Ten. Now, I can't judge that off of just 1 year. You're going to go into a new conference. If it doesn't go well, again, I don't believe this, but I'm saying if it doesn't go well, if it's lower than expectations or even lower than that, going into your first year into a new conference, that's not going to say, okay, you don't belong, go back to the Pac-12, which isn't even a thing anymore, but you shouldn't be here. I don't believe that at all. But it almost feels like, hey, man, like we're USC. We're coming into the Big Ten. We're going to prove that we belong. We're going to prove that we can dominate and that we deserve to be here and that we can compete with some of the best teams in the country. We're going to the reigning national championship team. We're playing them week 3. So there's a lot of tests, if you will, throughout the year. But I don't know if it's truly a sense of urgency. And I think you have to be realistic with yourself at some point, knowing that you do have a new quarterback that's going to be a first-year starter. You do have pieces on the offensive line with a new quarterback at the same time, which is going into that. You also have a entirely new defensive staff. So and these aren't excuses, it's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
There's going to be some growing pains. And by the way, you're going into a new conference on those growing pain year or into this growing pain year. So I don't know. It's just, again, like we talked about before on podcast, this is the biggest offseason, the biggest question mark that I can remember for USC football going into a season in recent history.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Rama we had a little tangent coming back now.
Yeah.
Rama said, how long does it take coaches to develop depth charts based on spring practices?
It depends. Now, if you have returning starters, that's obviously a good feeling. A returning starter that isn't going to have to compete for that spot again, right? So last year, Caleb Williams coming back, you knew he was the guy.
Yeah.
You had multiple guys. Justin Dietich, you knew he, obviously moved to center, but you knew he was going to be on the offensive line. Jonah Monheim, guys that are captains, standout talent players that you're going to have no matter what. But when it comes to position battles, it's kind of like I said, right? It's tough to make that decision early on because you got to feed the hot hand, if you will, but you want them to be hot at the right time. You got to get hot, and you got to be consistent, but you got to get hot right before season. But I think quarterback is a spot that you need to make that decision a little earlier. I think when you go to more different position battles like wide receiver, linebacker, corner, safety, you can wait a little bit longer and push that back, or you can go week to week basis on that. Now, you don't want to, continue having guys play with different faces week in and week out, barring injury. But I think with position battles, you can kind of really lean on that. So I guess the short answer is towards the end of fall camp, maybe going into that, when you do the mock game week, going into that saying, hey, these are the ones and twos that we have right now. We've solidified. We've taken all the information from spring, from summer, from fall camp, and now we're a week or two out from season. Now we're really going to form that depth chart and who's going to be the starters going into the game.
Shavira said, I know Coach Riley said he didn't want to grow dependent on the transfer portal, but with NIL now playing a role in flipping commits, do you think SC's approach will adjust accordingly in the future?
Yeah, it's and kind of what Coach Riley said is you don't want to. You want to develop guys, right? And we just talked about how awesome it is to have this young receiver core, all freshmen that are, developing under Coach Riley and his offensive staff. But at the same time, to be competitive in today's era of college football, you've got to be dominant in NIL and you have to be dominant in the transfer portal, and those work hand in hand. So yeah, I as much as you don't want to as a head coach, as much as you want to develop that culture and recruit guys as high school players and develop them as freshmen all the way up until there's a junior or senior and they leave, that's not the reality of it. It may sound good and it may be that's what you want to do. And hopefully you do get players that stay from freshmen all the way up. But at the same time, this is the most selfish era of college football for players. And not saying it in a bad way. You've got to look out for yourself, right? We see coaches that leave all the time. We see head coaches that take different jobs almost sometimes after a year or two. So the players should be able to do that as well. It's just tough to really develop young guys without getting them to leave because we've said you've got to recruit them to come to the school, and then you've got to recruit them to stay at the school as well.
I wonder if going forward, because we're so early in this era that you just described, that will there be a cause and effect where we'll see hey, you know what? Actually, there is a method to the madness when it comes to being at one place for 3 years, 4 years, getting that consistency, especially when it comes to the trenches and stuff like that. I feel like that time together is so important. And you seem like you have a thought there, Cody. So
no, and you're making a good point. It's just it's tough to say that, and I know Lincoln's saying that because that's what you want to do as a head coach is develop players. That's how you're judged. When I'm a parent and I have a kid that's getting ready to go to college, my first question is going to be, how are you going to develop my son into not only, or daughter, or whatever I have, to any coach at any level, at any sport? How are you going to develop them into a good person, but also a better athlete? How are you going to get them to the next level, I guess, is my biggest question. But going back to what Lincoln said is not wanting to rely on the portal. We got Caleb Williams from the portal, who won a Heisman Trophy. We've got Marshawn Lloyd, who is our RB1. We had Travis Dye, who is our running back 1. We got Austin Jones. We've got Bear Alexander, Mason. It's just so many impact players
that's fair.
Came from the portal. But then you have your guys that have been here, right? You got the D-Ditch story that I absolutely love. You got the Brett Nealon, the guys that have been here that have great stories and have paid their dues. The Miller Moss story right now, we're watching it in real time. But we've had so many. We got a Heisman Trophy winner that came from the portal. So it's tough to discredit how important the transfer portal is.
And that's where I think it's when you go more an individualistic skill position rather than a trench position, offensive, defensive line. I don't know.
And that's NIL with more opportunities. It's unfortunate for my big guys up front on both sides of the ball, but there are more NIL opportunities. You see more.
Yes and no.
But you see more starting quarterbacks and starting receivers.
Sure.
And starting running backs, starting even big name, maybe DBs or linebackers, who you would say, hey, you're being productive here. Why would you leave? That leave to go get a better NIL deal. That leave to go to a bigger program, right? That's kind of the situation at hand right now is, hey, you've already solidified yourself as a starter at this one spot. That's why it's tough for coaches to recruit. That's why it's tough to develop if you're not a powerhouse school. Now, we are, so we have a little bit of an advantage in that situation, but it's tough to get guys to stay when, NIL money talks. It really does. And you have to be competitive in it to be competitive in recruiting, and in the transfer portal, you have to have a good NIL program. And that's just the reality of college football. It's a new era.
It's still getting used to it.
I'm torn. Part of me is hey, let's go back to, you're hungry, you're earning it. You've got to make a name for yourself so you can get paid in the NFL. But I also see the other side of it of guys who don't make it to the NFL, who maybe have great college careers or, jersey sales programs, different things take advantage of your name and use you for different things, and you don't see any of the benefits of that. That's frustrating as well. So I'm on both. I'm kind of on the fence. I'm torn with that. But and then you have also players that leave. You have coaches that leave after 1 year.
Yeah,
it's tough to get them to say, "Hey, well, you should stay if your coach can leave. Why can't I leave?" You know. So
as we've said before, it's very complex.
This is going to continue to be the same every time it gets brought up, and I love talking about it. But it's so tough to figure out what is the right answer.
I feel like the only way it would truly change back to quote unquote the old ways is if it comes from the NFL being like, people aren't being developed enough. You need to stay in a
That's
place.
A good point. Yeah.
Because I feel like that's the only thing that would actually move the needle is you're going to mess up your draft stock.
Yeah, but
in some cases, I know in other cases that's not going to happen, but you know what I mean? Like,
but I mean, I guess if you look at, so the first 3 picks, assuming this year, are going to be Caleb 1, transfer player, Jaden Daniels 2, transfer player, but then you have Drake May 3, who stayed in North Carolina and has been there. So I guess it's both ways, but I'm with you. If you say, hey, I mean, but then the thing that for me that's tough is the argument for that, like if I'm an offensive coach or a GM going to meet with a quarterback that's been at 3 different teams and been productive at all 3 spots in college, I'm gonna say, wow, you can really learn a playbook. You can really, it doesn't matter where you're at, you're gonna be ready to go year in and year out. So yes, I get what you're saying, but it's a crazy time. I think commissioner for NCAA for football. I think there needs to be a commissioner in football. I think there needs to be a GM at every college that treats it as not above the head coach decision making, but when it comes to portal stuff, that's their job. A GM like they do in the NFL that handles trades, if you will, or portal talk and NIL stuff, and also contracts for players. That's 2 years, freshman, sophomore year, you sign a contract. So at least you're there for 2 years. 2 years, junior, senior year. And then if you stay for a 5th year, you sign a 1 year there. But there's a void clause that if your coach leaves or something like that. Sua was getting pretty heated on the. Did you hear what he said?
No.
He said there should be a clause that if you sign a contract and then you leave, you pay all that money back. And I'm like, well, I don't know if they're
does the coach do that too?
Yeah, exactly. So, but I mean, this is going to be an open topic for years to come until they solidify a more productive way to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Final point on this. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But to close the loop on, development, I think for the people you're referencing, like the Caleb Williams, who knew basically that he had a starting spot ready to go.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter if you transfer. I'm talking about the people where you don't know for sure if you're going to have a starting spot and you're just hopping into the portal. Like
hoping someone offers you, hoping that
Are you just like sacrificing the years of development you could get versus like, okay, you go into the portal and then you're kind of a middle of the road player. You go into the portal again, you're not really getting the snaps that you think. You know what I mean? Like
we've seen guys like that.
And what I'm saying is like, I feel like more often than not, that's the case of the portal. Like I've seen quote unquote studies about like portal success, and it's like the Caleb Williams of the world are the higher, like the more rare,
but we hear more of those stories because
higher publicized, I should say.
Yeah, bigger name, bigger image.
Yeah. So will there be a regression? I don't know.
I mean, I think the only answer to that is if you're at a place to where you're like, I'm never going to play, I'm not going to start. The coaches don't want me to play, like whatever you may feel like, and that's your last resort.
Yeah,
that I think that's fine, but don't expect it to go better somewhere else, right? You can't just say, "Oh, the portal is going to fix all my problems and solve everything." Like you still have to go perform. You still have to win a starting job. I get what you're saying, but then guys go to the portal that maybe are like a 2 somewhere, but then you go to the portal and you end up being a 4 somewhere else, and you bounce around and get to a 3 else. Like I get what you're saying. That's probably the more realistic or the more common story.
Yeah,
that you hear that we don't hear about. But I think obviously the biggest ones we hear about are the Caleb Williams and the big name, the Jordan Addisons of the world that are getting NIL deals to go play at a bigger name or a bigger program. And I'm not saying that other schools they were at before. Obviously, Caleb came over here with Lincoln, but some of these guys that are at Maava, Jaden Maava, right?
Yeah.
UNLV, which he played great at. I'm not saying anything against him, but you come play now going to the Big Ten, USC, a bigger Power 5 conference school. I get why guys are doing that, but at the same time,
I know.
We could probably do a full
100%.
five part series on NIL and transfer portal.
100%.
It's just going to be interesting to see how it keeps adapting, adjusting going forward,
evolving for sure. Alrighty, 2 more questions. First one is from Vincent, who said, "Will they still play the YMCA during games? Please say no. Seriously, lame." Vincent, we do not control that. DJ Malski is the one who plays it, and he actually said he's open to whatever USC fans want on his Twitter account. So
wait, do they?
Vincent,
they do play the YMCA.
They do. And for the record, people turn up for the YMCA
Yeah, they do.
at the
They do.
Coliseum. So
I do remember that now.
you're in the minority here, Vincent.
Yeah.
So not sure what to tell you there. But go to Twitter and lobby DJ.
Yeah, we have no say.
Else.
Yeah, we have no say in that one.
Not us. And then Samuel had multiple questions. He said,
Of course.
Yes. He said, did either of you catch the LSU spring game? Was there anything you saw that made you more or less confident for SC's chances September 1st?
I did not. Did you watch that?
I did not know.
Okay, so to answer that, Samuel, knowing me being a football nerd, I promise you I will watch it. We're about 5 months away, though, so I have not taken a peek at that, but I'll probably watch it a couple times before that first breakdown.
How much can you really glean from a spring game?
Yeah, again,
The
you
motto
can't,
of
but,
today's podcast.
But you can learn. Yeah, well, it's going to be, I'll definitely watch the spring game. This is kind of answering Sam's question, but also going off of it. When you prepare for a first opponent, you watch the spring game, obviously.
Okay.
You watch their film from a year ago with returning players. Obviously, they lost a quarterback and some other big-name guys. But you also read some of the notes from their beat writers for fall camp, right? Who's making an impact, the open practices, what can you learn from them, what can you see, hey, this guy's playing here, this guy might be a starter here, who's going to be the starting quarterback. So you can learn a bunch of that, watch the bowl game as well. But, again, it's tough because a lot of the guys transfer from a year ago, and there's a lot of new faces and new names, just like pretty much everywhere. But, yeah, spring game can't take a whole lot, but you do get a first look at, again, like I said, standout players, rotation, where the coaches are at now, but then you also look into the notes from fall camp. But, Samuel, I will watch that, I promise, before September 1st, and I will report back to you about 5 months from now.
So check in 5 months.
I'm sure Sam will have a lot
5
more.
months?
Yeah, 5. So May, June, July, August, September.
Wow.
5 months.
Technically a little bit earlier
Why?
because we probably had the podcast in August.
Oh, when you're talking about our podcast?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we'll probably talk. Well, I
I'm
guess
being technical,
realistically,
sorry.
No, realistically, we'll probably talk about the LSU game like 2 months out because
Yes.
that's what we do.
Yes.
But the actual
Okay, there
pregame
you
or
go.
the preview episode will
Got
be
it.
in about 5 months.
Gotcha. That was got it and gotcha together. Really weird.
We're getting this is
I know.
the end of the episode where we're both been down here for about 3 hours.
Delirious. As such, the final question from Sam says, also, is Cowboy Carter the new official music album of the Victory Pod a country album by Beyonce? There's nothing more Cody and Keely than that. It's true, but she did say in her Insta caption that it's not a country album, it's a Beyonce album. So
Wait. What's Cowboy Carter?
it's Beyonce's new album.
Oh,
That
okay.
is country themed.
It is okay.
So it is technically
My wife was telling me about the she was explaining
combo
this
of
to me the
Keely
other
and
day.
Cody right there.
Yeah, I again, sorry for all you Beyonce fans, including the one I'm sitting across from right now.
Yes.
I don't listen to Beyonce,
All good.
but I am a big country fan, so
It is kind of a crossover.
yeah, I guess. But again, going forward, I promise you, I probably will not be listening to
That's totally fine.
it ever.
But the answer is yes, Sam.
But my wife was trying to explain, like, hey, she's doing a country album, but they're not saying it's country and this and that. I'm like, that's fine. I'm gonna go listen to my country music. But
Yeah, okay.
I know
It's fine.
Keely will love that.
Yeah, exactly.
But is that it?
Yes,
That's
wrap
the last
it up.
question.
Go for it.
Wrapping it up, I think, again, this is kind of our spring wrap up. Next up, coming up,
Crazy.
will be.
We got to recap the draft next week.
Oh, yeah, we do. I'm excited for that, too. That's going to be
Yeah.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
going to be fun. Caleb did put on, you see what he said on Twitter
I always-
about be ready for my outfit? Or
Oh, did
just-
he? No, I
Yeah,
did
he
not
put some
see
on
that.
Twitter about, you want to be shocked. Wait till you see my outfit. So that'll be
I mean,
something to talk about.
He had outfits for like normal games,
Yeah.
let alone the draft.
Yeah, it'll be fun. There'll be a lot of storylines from that. Also, I love, and you get the big name guys. You get, Caleb, obviously, in my opinion, is going to be the first overall pick, as he should be. But I'm excited to see where Brendan goes, and Taj Washington, some of the Solomon Byrd, some of the guys fighting for a spot
Yeah,
that I think are going to be
100%.
impact players, kind of guys that are under the radar a little bit. So that'll be a good episode. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We are done. Spring ball is over with. Spring game, in my opinion, a success. Check. Defense looked great. Still a lot to improve on. Overall quarterback position is going to be fun to watch. Ton of position battles, ton of new players, impact guys. I am recapping recap, so I'm done. I'm
Incredible.
talking too much. We've been down here for a while. Love you guys. Fight on.
Alrighty. You heard the man. That's going to wrap it up for the spring game recap and spring practice as a whole. I almost said
Yeah.
spring game as a whole. Okay.
Spring.
It's time to wrap it up.
It's
Thank
time.
you so much for listening. We'll be back next week to recap the NFL draft. But that's going to wrap it up. That's Cody. I'm Keely. We'll see y'all next time.